Somewhere right now, a woman 15 or 20 years younger than you is more attracted to you than you realize. And the reason has nothing to do with looks, money, or anything you've been told. It has nothing to do with what you own or what you've achieved. And it has almost nothing to do with your age itself. What it has everything to do with is something you are already carrying. Something that developed quietly over decades of living, and something she can feel before either of you has spoken a single word about it. The reason most men miss this is not because they are unobservant. It is because they have been given the wrong explanation for so long that they stopped looking for the real one. They were told this kind of attraction is about status or security or some unresolved psychological wound on her side. And because those explanations felt either too flattering or too uncomfortable, most men filed the question away and never looked deeper. But there is something else happening, something quieter, something that operates beneath the surface of every interaction, on her side and on yours. And once you understand what it actually is, you will never look at these dynamics the same way again. By the end of this video, you will have a clear, honest understanding of the real psychology behind why younger women are drawn to older men. Not the surface version, not the cynical version, but the actual internal logic she follows, often without being able to name it herself. She doesn't sit down and think, he's older, therefore I'm attracted. That's not how it works. What she feels is something else entirely, and it arrives before she has words for it. This is the first thing worth understanding, and it reframes everything that comes after. Female attraction is not a checklist. It is not a calculation. It is, at its core, an emotional response to a very specific feeling. And that feeling is difficult to manufacture, difficult to fake, and almost impossible to describe from the outside. But it is very easy to sense from the inside. When a woman encounters a man and finds herself drawn to him in a way she cannot immediately explain, what she is usually responding to is the presence of something she can only describe as certainty. Not certainty about the future, not certainty about what he wants from her, certainty within him. A quality of settledness that communicates without words that this is a man who knows who he is and has stopped auditioning for approval. That is the question she is asking without asking it. Not how old is he, not what does he earn. The question her nervous system is running constantly and unconsciously is something closer to, does this person need something from me in order to feel okay? And when the answer she receives is no, when she senses a man who is complete rather than searching, something shifts in her, quietly, irreversibly. Now you might be thinking, couldn't any man project that quality regardless of age? And yes, occasionally, there are younger men who carry it, but they are genuinely rare, and the reason for that matters enormously. Because it points directly to why age in this context is not the variable. What age tends to produce is the variable, and those are very different things. The men who carry that quality of inner settledness almost always built it the same way, through outcomes, through loss that didn't destroy them, through failure that didn't define them, through success that didn't become their identity. Through enough years of living that the anxiety of not yet knowing who you are has simply burned itself out. That is what she is reading when she looks at an older man and feels that pull she cannot quite explain. She is not responding to his age. She is responding to what his age required of him to survive. And that distinction, once you see it, changes everything about how you understand this. It's not that younger men are doing something wrong. It's that they're carrying something, a kind of invisible static that older men have usually learned to put down. This is important to sit with because it is not a criticism of younger men. It is a description of something almost developmental, something that most people pass through, not something that defines anyone permanently. But understanding it explains the contrast that younger women consistently describe when they reflect on what draws them toward men with more years behind them. Younger men in general, and of course there are always exceptions, context always matters here, tend to carry what behavioral researchers describe as social performance anxiety, the orientation toward being seen in a particular way, the monitoring of how they are being received, the low level but constant effort to manage the impression they are making. This is not vanity, it is not weakness. It is the natural state of a person who has not yet fully resolved the question of who they are. The static it produces is subtle. It shows up as over-explanation, as humor deployed slightly too quickly in moments of tension, as a hunger for reassurance that is almost invisible but entirely felt, as the faint sense that this person needs the interaction to go a certain way in order to feel settled. Women feel that static. They may not name it. They may not even be consciously aware of it. But their nervous systems register it in the same way they register temperature, not through deliberate analysis, but through direct sensation. Older men who have done the internal work, not all of them, but those who have largely put that static down. Not because they stopped caring what people think, but because they stopped needing a particular response in order to feel okay about themselves. That shift is quiet. It produces no announcement, but it changes the entire quality of presence a man brings into a room. She doesn't experience this as he's more mature than the men I usually meet. She experiences it as something about being near him makes me feel strangely calm. And that calm is not neutral. For a woman whose nervous system has been trained to remain alert to the signals around her, encountering a person who produces calm instead of static is a genuinely unusual experience. Unusual enough to notice. Unusual enough to feel drawn toward. There's a quality some men have that's very difficult to name, but a woman feels it the moment she's in the room with him. It's not confidence exactly. It's something steadier than that. The word I would use for it is gravity. Not in the celestial sense, though the metaphor is surprisingly accurate, but in the sense of weight, presence, the quality of occupying space without effort or apology, and without need for the space to respond in any particular way. Emotional gravity is not something you perform. That is the first and most important thing to understand about it. Men who try to project it, who adopt a deliberate stillness, who lower their voice to communicate authority, who deploy pauses for effect, produce something that feels immediately wrong to women, even when they cannot identify why. Because emotional gravity, the real version, is not a stance. It is a condition. It is the result of having lived through enough to stop being surprised by difficulty, stop being wounded by disappointment, and stop needing external validation to confirm your own worth. Researchers in attachment behavior have described this quality in different ways: secure attachment style, low reactivity, internal locus of control, but the plain language version is simply this. It is the felt sense of a person who has arrived. Not arrived at perfection, not arrived at certainty about all things, but arrived at himself. Women's nervous systems are calibrated at a very deep level to detect this quality. This is not metaphysical, it is biological. The signals that produce the experience of emotional safety in a woman are specific, measurable, and deeply tied to the consistency of a man's presence rather than the performance of it. Does he respond the same way under pressure as he does when things are easy? Does he remain recognizably himself when he is challenged? Does his sense of self appear to require her agreement in order to stay intact? When those questions are answered in the right direction, not through deliberate answers, but through the accumulated texture of ordinary interaction, something triggers in her that she will usually describe later as feeling like she had never met anyone quite like him. That feeling is not imagination. It is the accurate recognition of something genuinely rare. Before we move further, there is one layer of this worth addressing directly, because it is the layer most people reach for first when trying to explain this kind of attraction. And it deserves a more careful look than it usually gets. This is the part most people get wrong or get uncomfortable with, but it's worth understanding clearly because it explains something she herself may not be able to tell you. When people try to explain why younger women are drawn to older men, the explanation they usually reach for is the father figure dynamic. And they are not entirely wrong, but the way they usually frame it, as a wound, as a deficit, as something to be explained away or pathologized, misses what is actually happening at the psychological level. And missing it leads to misunderstanding the attraction entirely. Attachment theory, the framework developed by psychologist John Bowlby and expanded significantly since, describes the way human beings build internal templates for relationship through their earliest experiences. Those templates are not fixed. They are updated throughout life, but they are influential in ways that operate well beneath conscious awareness. What a person experiences as safety, as comfort, as home, these are not arbitrary preferences. They are learned associations built through repetition, stored in the body as much as in the mind. For a younger woman who grew up around a consistent, emotionally present, secure adult male figure, whether a father, an uncle, a mentor, the felt sense of that presence becomes a kind of baseline. Not something she is consciously seeking to recreate, but something her nervous system recognizes when it encounters it again. The recognition produces an emotional response before the mind has time to analyze it. It produces the sensation of, this is familiar, this feels safe, this feels like something I have known. And here is the part that most explanations skip over entirely. This dynamic has almost nothing to do with her actual father and everything to do with her nervous system's association between emotional gravity and emotional safety. A woman who grew up with a consistent, secure male presence is not looking for her father in a romantic partner. She is looking for the quality that presence produced in her, and she is recognizing it when she finds it in a man who has developed it through decades of his own living. Of course, context matters here. Every person's psychology is different, every history is different, and no framework explains every individual. But the pattern across cultures, across backgrounds, across very different life histories is consistent enough to take seriously. What she is responding to is not his age. It is not a wound. It is the felt recognition of emotional safety in a form her body knows how to trust. She won't hand you a scorecard, but she is paying attention to things you probably aren't tracking in moments you wouldn't think to notice. This is where we move from the internal psychology to the observable surface. Because emotional gravity is not invisible. It expresses itself in behavior, in very specific, very ordinary moments that most men pass through without registering their significance. And what younger women are doing without any deliberate analysis is reading those moments with a precision that is almost startling once you become aware of it. Think back to a conversation that once seemed ordinary, one where you walked away without realizing what had actually just happened. The first thing she registers is how you handle conflict or interruption without escalating. This is perhaps the clearest behavioral signal of emotional gravity, and it plays out in moments that feel almost too small to matter. Someone challenges something you've said. A plan falls apart unexpectedly. Something does not go the way you intended. The question her nervous system asks in that moment is not, what will he do? It is, does he change? Does the man who was present a moment ago become a different, more reactive version of himself when friction arrives? Or does something in him simply hold steady? She is not hoping for a performance of calm. She is watching for the absence of escalation, and that absence, when it is genuine, is felt immediately. The second signal is how you speak about your past without bitterness or boasting. This one is more subtle, but it is consistently significant. When an older man references his history, his failures, his difficult years, his earlier relationships, the emotional register he uses tells her something very precise about where he currently lives inside himself. Bitterness means the past still has him. Boasting means he still needs it to define him. Neither is what she is looking for. What she is looking for, what registers as emotionally safe, is the quality of reflection without charge. The ability to speak about hard things in a tone that communicates, I have been through this and it made me what I am, and I am at peace with that. The third signal is whether you are curious about her without being hungry for her approval. There is a particular quality to the attention an older man pays to a younger woman when he is genuinely interested, and it is distinct from the attention she usually receives from men her own age. It is curious without being consuming. It asks questions that are actually interested in the answers. It listens in a way that does not immediately pivot back to his own experience. But here is the crucial detail. It does not require her to respond in any particular way in order to remain steady. She can be guarded and he does not become hurt. She can be slow to open and he does not become impatient. The curiosity is genuine, but it is not desperate, and that distinction is everything. Now here is the midpoint reminder worth placing here, because we are approaching the signal that matters most. Remember what was said at the start? That there is something she is feeling before she can explain it. Something operating beneath the surface that most men never become aware of. We are getting close to it now. The fourth signal is how you occupy physical space, specifically the difference between stillness and nervous energy. This is perhaps the most primal of the signals because it bypasses cognitive interpretation entirely and registers directly at the level of physical sensation. A man who fidgets, who shifts, who scans a room for external confirmation, who adjusts his posture in response to how he perceives he is being received. This produces a specific low-level alertness in the women nearby. It is not a judgment, it is simply a nervous system responding to cues that something in the environment is unsettled. An older man who has stopped performing, who sits, stands, and moves from a place of genuine ease rather than self-monitoring, produces an entirely different physical experience in the people near him. She does not analyze this. She simply notices that she feels different in his presence than she feels in most others. The fifth signal, and this is the one that is most consistently overlooked, the one I have been building toward, is how you respond to her testing behavior. And this one requires a slightly longer explanation because it is the most misunderstood signal in this entire dynamic. Women test, not deliberately, not consciously, not maliciously, but consistently and inevitably. They say something slightly challenging to see if you become defensive. They pull back briefly to see if you become anxious. They express a contrary opinion to see if you need her to agree in order to stay comfortable. These are not games. They are the nervous system's way of gathering information about whether the quality of presence she has sensed in you is real or performed. Younger men almost universally fail these tests, not because they are less capable, but because they do not yet have enough settled identity to allow the challenge to simply pass through them without sticking. They defend, they over-explain, they pursue when she pulls back. Every one of these responses confirms that the steadiness was performance, not condition. Older men who have genuinely resolved their identity questions pass these tests naturally. Not strategically, they are not playing a counter game. They simply do not need the test to resolve in their favor in order to feel okay. They can allow the disagreement to exist, they can allow the silence to remain, they can let her pull back without reading it as rejection or pursuing her to relieve their own discomfort. And that specific non-reactivity in the face of her testing is what she was looking for all along. That is the moment most men walk past without realizing it was the most important one. Women who have been in this kind of dynamic often describe it the same way. Not necessarily in these words, but the feeling is consistent. It felt like something they didn't know they'd been looking for. This is the part of the psychology that explains not just why the attraction forms, but why it tends to be so unusually strong when it does. Because what we have been describing, emotional gravity, settled identity, non-reactive presence, the ability to be curious without being hungry, is not common in men of any age. And when a younger woman encounters all of it in the same person, her emotional system responds with an intensity that can feel disproportionate even to her. This is what researchers who study attachment and pair bonding describe as compound recognition, the moment when multiple deep psychological criteria are met simultaneously by the same person. The brain in this moment does not register this as I am attracted to this man. It registers it as I have found something rare, and it responds accordingly with the kind of focus and emotional investment that she may not be able to fully explain even to herself. This is why women who have experienced this kind of connection often describe it as feeling different from other relationships, not simply better, but categorically different, as though it belongs to a separate class of experience. That difference is not coincidence. It is the felt result of a psychological match that occurs genuinely very rarely. And here is the deepest truth this entire video has been building toward. You are not competing with younger men on their terms. You were never supposed to be. The qualities that make this attraction possible, the gravity, the settledness, the non-reactive presence, the ability to be curious without being consuming. These are not qualities that youth produces. They are qualities that life produces. And you have been building them without deliberate effort for decades. The only question is whether you have been showing up with full access to what you have actually become, or whether old habits of performance and self-monitoring have been dimming the very qualities that make you exactly what she is looking for. What all of this points to is a single unified truth. Younger women are not choosing older men despite the age gap. They are choosing them because of what the age gap represents, the accumulated evidence of a man who has lived and survived and arrived at himself. The emotional gravity she feels in his presence is not accidental. The calm she experiences near him is not incidental. The way she responds to his non-reactivity is not irrational. Each of these is a specific response to a specific psychological quality, and those qualities are real, earned, and available to you in ways they are genuinely not yet available to men who have lived far fewer years. You do not need to manufacture this. You do not need to perform it. What you need is simply to stop underestimating what you have already built and to carry it into your interactions with the quiet authority it deserves. You have more to offer in this specific dimension than you have likely ever been told. And now you know why. Tell me in the comments, which of those 5 signals surprised you most? Or which one do you think you already carry naturally? I read every comment, and the patterns in your answers usually shape what comes next on this channel. If this kind of honest look at female psychology is something you want more of, subscribing means you will not miss what is coming. Because on this channel, we do not deal in surface level advice. We look at what is actually happening inside her, inside the dynamic, inside the moments that most people walk through without understanding. In the next video, I'm going to show you the specific mistakes that older men make. Small ones, easy ones, that quietly erase everything I just described. If you've ever felt like you had the right presence, but something still went wrong, that video is for you.